All right, payment giant MasterCard is facing mounting pressure to monitor money going to far-right groups whom many view as hate groups. The credit card company is proposing setting up a human rights committee to monitor the financial flows. Joining us to discuss, we have investigative journalist Ben Swann. All right, Ben, U.S.-based political activist group Some of Us are upping their game to combat those who they view as hate groups and even individuals. Tommy Robinson is a name that they've highlighted just as an example. They want financial firms like MasterCard to shut down their access or accounts altogether. My question to you, should MasterCard comply with these demands, or should white supremacists like Robinson still have access to these, very day-to-day normal payment systems?
So it's a good question. Number one, I would say this, that MasterCard should not be involved in this. Neither should PayPal, neither should Patreon, neither should any of these funding platform groups be involved in censoring people who were deemed as being hate groups. And the reason for that is because it's a very, very slippery slope, Manila. When we talk about a human rights board being set up for MasterCard to determine who is going to be allowed to use MasterCard, the problem is that all becomes relative. So if we're talking about human rights, should members of Congress be banned from using MasterCard or receiving MasterCard payments simply because they all stand by while a war in Yemen goes on and they do nothing to end that? Because you could argue there are human rights abuses there. You could argue, if you're talking about hate groups, there are many people who argue that Black Lives Matter is a hate group. So should all people involved in Black Lives Matter protests not be allowed to use MasterCard? So the problem with this is not that MasterCard is trying to, be a part of activism. It's that these groups specifically target groups of people, and they say, well, we can all agree that white supremacy is terrible, and I think we can all agree with that. The only people who like white supremacists are white supremacists. The problem is that it never stays with one group. It always translates into other groups as well.
Now, I want you, on that note, I want you to listen to something, because we have a sound bite. RT spoke with Tommy Robinson in the past. Listen to what he said, and we'll talk about it on the other side.
Sure.
Removed from PayPal. The next steps, we're seeing people's bank accounts be closed down already. They will not be happy until even maybe our mobile phones will be turned off. And that's the future. And that's a worry. That should be worrying for everybody, even our opposition.
All right, so you talked about this just a moment ago. Where do you draw the line then of who can have credit cards, who can use Venmo, get an apartment, buy a car, things of that nature? Yes. I mean, isn't this a very slippery slope if we begin to discriminate against even the most vile among us?
Absolutely it is, because the problem is every time you discriminate against someone who you consider vile, you have allowed for discrimination against yourself by anyone who considers you vile. And that can be for a variety of reasons. This group, Some of Us, says that they want to fight against groups that are white supremacist and anti-Islamic. Okay, but what happens when suddenly someone decides that, well, Islam is a hate group, because there are people who certainly believe that. What about those who start to begin to say that Christianity is a hate group? There are people who believe that. The problem is that everyone has their own views, and in a free society, the idea of a free society is that you are free to have your belief systems as long as you're not harming anyone else physically, but your belief systems belong to you, and you have the right to be wrong. White supremacists have a right to be wrong in what they believe. The answer to it, though, is not to, as exactly what Tommy Robinson said, shutting down their cell phones, removing them from having banking, having apartments, living in. What's going to happen to these people is the idea that they will all disappear. They're going to dissipate into the atmosphere, because they're not. What's going to happen is you're going to drive them underground, and they're going to continue to build animosity, and other people who will look at it and say, well, maybe they have a point because these groups are fighting against them so hard.
Yeah, you know what, Ben? Whether we like it or not, people have the right to be big old words I can't say on television. They can be jerks if they want. They have the right, as long as they're not physically harming somebody. So let me ask you this then. Do big financial firms like MasterCard or big tech like Apple, social media giants like Facebook, Twitter, do they have any sort of social responsibility to curb the ability of anybody to reach an audience or to gather funds? Do they have a responsibility to the rest of us?
No, I absolutely believe they do not. I think this is the biggest misnomer in our society right now when it comes to big tech. It is a lie that's being propagated not by naive people who simply think that these big tech firms have the ability to shape and change the world into a better place. It's actually being done by those who want to manipulate this system in order to censor any voice they disagree with. So if you are a group that wants to bring awareness to vaccines, they're going to want to shut you down and lock you out of your MasterCard and bank account as well, because you're a danger to society. The problem is when those at the top of society decide that everything that bucks their system is a threat and therefore dangerous. And again, in a free society, you have the right to be wrong. And this idea that tech companies will save us all is an absolute lie. They will not save us all.
And real quickly, Ben, the SEC, Securities Exchange Commission, has weighed in on this, giving the green light to MasterCard to consider doing such a thing. If the SEC is now involved, can we see a broader government involvement on these issues in the future? And what might be some of those pitfalls if the government gets involved?
I think we will see the government getting more involved. The fact that the SEC has given the green light to this essentially says that the SEC supports the idea of censoring these groups in order to freeze out essentially anyone you don't agree with. And I would remind viewers who hate white supremacy, as I do, that this is not the answer to combating these kinds of issues, because instead you're telling the government you have the right to tell us what speech is harmful and dangerous to society, what ideas are harmful and dangerous, and what people are harmful and dangerous, and ultimately giving government and big corporations the ability to control what voices are heard. It is such a dystopian 1984 worldview, and yet we're living through it right now.
Yeah, we're giving up our freedoms because things are uncomfortable. So we'll leave it right there. As always, Ben Swann, appreciate your take on this.
Manila, thanks.
Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out our channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. We have tons of content for you just like this. For more of RT America's one-of-a-kind news and analysis, be sure to subscribe and never stop questioning more.